The crimson wine hit her chest like a wound. For a second, the grand marble hall fell silent except for the faint splash as the deep red liquid soaked into the pale blue fabric of the waitress's uniform, spreading slowly over her heart. Gasps rippled through the afternoon charity gala like wine through dry leaves. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above, sunlight pouring through towering windows and reflecting off polished floors as if the room itself were watching. The heiress's hand still hovered in the air, the empty glass tilted, a thin drop of wine trembling at its edge. The waitress lowered her eyes. And in that humiliating silence, something inside her cracked. If you are watching pure kindness and you believe in hope, compassion, and second chances, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stories like this remind us that kindness still matters. Her name was Mirela Ionescu, 27 years old, daughter of a seamstress who had stitched wedding gowns for wealthy strangers but could never afford silk for herself. Mirela had grown up in a one-room apartment overlooking a railway yard, where trains screamed past at dawn and dusk like restless spirits. She had studied literature at a public university on scholarship, dreaming of becoming a teacher. But when her mother's kidneys began to fail 2 years earlier, the dream folded neatly into a drawer like an unfinished letter. Hospital bills replaced textbooks. Shifts replaced seminars. The uniform replaced the dream. Now she stood in the sunlit ballroom of the Virelli estate, a mansion that looked less like a home and more like a monument to money. The gala was meant to raise funds for women's empowerment, ironic words printed in gold on tall banners flanking the staircase. Guests in tailored suits and designer dresses sipped imported wine and discussed philanthropy as though it were a fashionable accessory. And then there was Seraphina Virelli. 32, heir to the Virelli luxury cosmetics empire, a woman raised in private jets and boarding schools in Switzerland. Her dark hair was styled in a perfect twist, her ivory silk gown hugging her frame with practiced elegance. She had inherited her father's sharp jawline and her mother's cool, calculating gaze. What she had not inherited was warmth. Seraphina had learned early that control was survival. Her childhood had been a sequence of headlines and expectations. Smile for the cameras. Stand straight. Never appear weak. After her mother's death from an overdose when Seraphina was 19, tabloids devoured the tragedy like vultures. She had promised herself she would never be the fragile one again. So she became steel. When Mirela had accidentally brushed against her moments earlier, a simple misstep in a crowded room, Seraphina felt the old familiar burn of humiliation, of being touched, jostled, disrupted. And instead of stepping back, she lifted her glass and tilted it. It was deliberate. The red stain bloomed across Mirela's uniform like an accusation. Careless, someone whispered in the background. Mirela's fingers tightened at the edges of her apron. The fabric clung coldly to her skin. She could smell the sharp sweetness of wine mixed with her own rising shame. She wanted to disappear into the gleaming floor, into the sunlight, into anything that wasn't this. But she didn't cry. Not here. She thought of her mother in a hospital bed by a window that barely opened, watching pigeons hop across a rusted railing. She thought of the dialysis machine humming like a tired lullaby. She thought of the envelope of unpaid bills tucked into her bag in the staff room. She swallowed. Around them, guests resumed murmuring. A few averted their eyes. Others watched with discreet fascination, the way people watch storms from a safe distance. Seraphina finally lowered her hand, placing the empty glass on a passing tray without looking. Her lips curved into something that resembled indifference more than satisfaction. In her mind, the incident was already over. A minor inconvenience corrected. But then the grand doors at the end of the hall opened. Sunlight spilled in brighter than before, cutting across the marble floor in a golden stripe. A tall figure stepped inside, removing his sunglasses as he walked. The room shifted subtly, like a compass finding north. Adrian Kovalenko. At 38, he had built a technology logistics empire from a rented warehouse and a borrowed laptop. Once a child in foster care, he had known hunger intimately. He had slept in cars, memorized bus schedules as escape routes, and learned to read people before they could reject him. Success had not erased those memories, it had sharpened them. He moved with quiet confidence, not flashy but grounded. His navy suit was impeccably tailored, but there was something unpolished in his gaze, an awareness, a habit of observing rather than demanding attention. Seraphina stiffened almost imperceptibly. They had married 6 months earlier in a ceremony broadcast across business channels and society pages. It was described as a power union. But behind the headlines lay a complicated truth. Adrian had fallen in love with a woman he believed was lonely beneath her armor. Seraphina had married a man who seemed steady enough to quiet her restless fears. They were still learning each other. Adrian's eyes scanned the room, offering polite nods. Then they paused. He saw the stain first. Red against blue. He saw Mirela standing frozen, hands trembling just slightly. He saw the circle of space around her, the invisible boundary created by embarrassment. And then he saw Seraphina. Time slowed. He walked forward, each step echoing softly against marble. Guests parted instinctively, curiosity thickening the air. Seraphina's heart began to pound. Not because she feared scandal. Not because she feared judgment. But because she recognized that look in Adrian's eyes. Disappointment. He reached Mirela first. He removed his jacket without hesitation and gently draped it over her shoulders, covering the stain. His movement was natural, unforced. Protective. Mirela looked up, startled. She had seen him only in business magazines, smiling beside charts and skyscrapers. Up close, his eyes were warmer than the photographs suggested. He studied the wine spreading beneath the jacket and felt something twist inside him, a memory of being humiliated in front of a classroom at 10 years old for wearing the same shirt 3 days in a row. Pain has a scent. He recognized it. Seraphina felt the room's attention shift toward her like a spotlight. Her chest tightened. In that bright, unforgiving daylight, she suddenly saw herself through unfamiliar eyes, not as powerful, not as untouchable, but as small. Adrian finally turned to her. There was no raised voice. No spectacle. Just silence heavy with meaning. And in that silence, Seraphina's carefully constructed armor cracked. Because she realized he had seen everything. Her impulse. Her cruelty. Her insecurity masquerading as authority. Mirela, overwhelmed, tried to step back, but Adrian gently guided her toward a side corridor where sunlight filtered through tall arched windows. Staff members hurried after them with napkins and water. The guests resumed their conversations, though the tone had shifted, less admiration, more scrutiny. Seraphina remained alone in the center of the ballroom. The chandeliers glittered above her, but they no longer felt warm. For the first time in years, she felt the sting of shame, not the tabloid kind, not the public relations kind. The kind that blooms privately, painfully. In the quiet corridor, Mirela finally broke. Tears slipped down her cheeks despite her effort to stay composed. Adrian listened as she haltingly explained that she needed the job, that she hadn't meant to cause trouble. He assured her she wasn't in trouble. He asked about the hospital bracelet peeking from her bag pocket. She told him about her mother. Each word seemed to settle heavily in his chest. He arranged for a car to take Mirela home and instructed the event manager that her position was secure. Then he stood alone for a moment by the window, watching sunlight spill across manicured gardens below. He had married a woman who understood ambition. But did she understand empathy? Back in the ballroom, Seraphina felt the weight of her own past pressing against her ribs. She remembered her mother's final months, how distant, how brittle she had seemed. How little kindness she had offered because she herself had been drowning. Was cruelty inherited like wealth? When Adrian returned, he didn't accuse her. He didn't lecture. He simply looked at her as if waiting. Waiting for who she would choose to be. The gala concluded under a strange, subdued brightness. Cameras captured smiles, but whispers lingered. That evening, in the quiet of their glass-walled penthouse overlooking the city, Seraphina sat alone in a shaft of fading daylight. The skyline glowed orange and gold. For the first time since childhood, she allowed herself to feel fragile. The next morning, while sunlight painted the city in pale blue, Seraphina drove, not with a chauffeur, not with assistants, to the hospital whose name she had quietly obtained from the event manager. She found Mirela in a waiting area beside her mother's bed. The older woman slept, thin and pale but peaceful. Seraphina stood there, humbled by the smell of antiseptic and the soft beeping of machines. Wealth had never sounded like this. She offered to cover the treatment costs anonymously through her foundation. She asked Mirela, not for forgiveness, but for a chance to do better. Mirela studied her carefully. She saw not an heiress, but a woman trying. Transformation does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, like morning light slipping under curtains. Weeks later, the Mirela Foundation announced a new program supporting hospital staff and low-income caregivers. There were no dramatic press conferences, no staged apologies. Just action. And somewhere in the city, a former waitress enrolled in evening classes again, her mother's health stabilizing. If this story touched your heart, please support it by liking and sharing pure kindness so more people can believe in second chances. Before we close, tell us in the comments, do you believe people can truly change after one painful mistake? On a bright afternoon months later, Seraphina stood once more in the marble hall during another charity event. Sunlight poured through the windows again, but this time it felt different. She noticed a young server nearly trip and instinctively reached out, not to humiliate, but to steady her. Across the room, Adrian watched quietly. Change is not loud. It is deliberate. It is uncomfortable. It is earned. And in that hall once stained by wine and pride, compassion finally flowed more freely than any drink ever had. Because sometimes, the moment that freezes us in shame becomes the very moment that thaws our hearts. And in that thawing, something far more valuable than wealth is born.